All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Schools Plus grant writing webinar. We're here today to share with you some tips and tricks and information to set your school up for grant writing success. We're really excited to have you all here today. This is actually a record-breaking webinar for us. We've had over 250 people subscribe for the webinar. So we've got people piling in. So really excited to have you all here. And we're excited for you for us to potentially be able to help you on your grant writing journey. So a little bit of admin before we kick things off. We will be recording this session, so feel free to take notes, but you can always watch it back. We'll be sending it out. And also to spread the awareness even more, you are welcome to share that link with other people. It'll be up on YouTube, so you will get the recording next week when we pop it up. We've muted everybody on the chat to eliminate distractions. So please keep yourself on mute. And if you want to turn off your camera as well, that would be great. We have one of our colleagues, Danny, in the chat, and she'll be there to answer any questions that you might have. If she can't answer them, then we will try to do our best to address them. And if not, we can send you an email afterwards if you pop in your email address. Lots of ways to get the information that you need. As you can see, we're using Zoom as our webinar platform. I'm sure you're all very familiar with that. So if you do have questions throughout, have a look in that chat where Danny will be. Talking about questions, thank you all for submitting your questions when you registered. We've tried to make this webinar fit the questions that you've asked. It's really great to know what stage you're at and what level of expertise you have already and what you need to know. So we'll be covering today grant basics, what grants are and what they can do for your school and who even offers them. Then we'll be talking about planning for grants, telling your story, connecting into the heart of the grant maker. Then where to find grants. This was the #1 question. Everybody wants to know where to find grants. Before I started working with grants and with schools, that was my key question: where on earth do I find grants? So that's one we'll definitely be focusing on. Preparing yourself for a grant application. And then we'll move into common questions you'll find in a grant application. And we will also be doing a Q&A session with our grant writing experts that we have here. So that's a nice lead in to introduce my co-host today. Oh, and there's a question in here. If we wanted the cameras on or off, could you turn them off, please? All right, so with me today, we have Cheryl Nixon. I'll hand over to Cheryl to introduce herself.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm the Director of Donor Relations with Schools Plus and lead our fundraising team. And so we're a fairly small team, but we spend a lot of our time writing grants to raise funds for schools all around the country. And I've been with Schools Plus for nearly 7 years, since its inception. But as well as having some experience writing grants for us, I've also spent a lot of time writing grants for my children's schools as a representative on the P&C and various sporting clubs and that sort of thing. So I'm really happy to help you out today.
Yeah, thanks. They're very lucky to have you on their grant writing team. You've done a lot for us. And then we've got Thomas Lopez. Thomas, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, Thomas, I'm the state manager for Victoria and Tasmania.
There, Thomas.
Oh, I should be off mute now. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you, Thomas. Don't worry.
Oh, weird. Not sure why they can't hear me.
Oh, Danny,
we can't hear you. I don't know why it's muted.
Okay.
That's very
sorry.
odd.
Continue.
I'll just go ahead. I'm the state manager for Victoria and Tasmania, and I work with supporters to Schools Plus that fund some amazing projects in schools across Australia, and specifically Victoria and Tasmania. I do a lot of grant writing, a lot of working with schools to develop applications that will be successful. And in past jobs, I worked on the other side of the aisle, with trust and foundations in assessing grants, so I have a good point of view from the other side of things.
Maybe while they sort it out, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Michael Fagan. I am a grants writer for Dementia Australia and Corey Foundation out here in New South Wales. I have over 5 years of grant writing experience. I have experience in writing government grants, trust and foundations, as well as tender applications and proposals for corporate. I have a psychology background. I come from Canada. So back in Canada, I actually worked frontline with at-risk youth. And when I came over to Australia, I just happened to move over into a corporate field and just started writing grants. So that's sort of where I've been ever since. Thanks so much, ladies. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Thank you. Yes, we sorted out our microphone issues or the speaker issues. Anyway, and I will introduce myself. So my name is Melissa Simons. I'm the school community fundraising officer here at Schools Plus. I help schools get their fundraising outside of the school gate, beyond the sausage sizzle, that kind of thing. And that really does involve helping schools to apply for grants. So if you decide to work with us at some point, your first point of contact will probably be me. So would love to work with you all. Okay, let's move into, what are we moving into now? Our Acknowledgement of Countries. I'll hand over to Cheryl, who will do that for us.
Great. Before we dive in, we do like to acknowledge that this country always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Melissa and I are joining you from Gadigal land in central Sydney, where the Darug word for hello is Warramie. So Warramie. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we are all joining from and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. And our First Nations people were this country's first teachers, and we also like to acknowledge that there's still a lot that we can learn about their culture and their history. I'm going to carry on now and give you a quick intro to Schools Plus as well, for those who don't know us so well. At Schools Plus, we are passionate about closing the education gap and making sure that students have the opportunities they need to succeed at school and beyond, and really no matter where they're from or their circumstances. We do that by empowering schools with financial support from a whole range of donors, from corporates, individuals, trusts and foundations, but also providing schools with coaching and a range of resources, including our very own fundraising platform that enable you to do the sorts of things that you need to do to support your students' greatest needs. We launched in 2014 as a result of the first Gonski review. And since then, we've been able to support more than 800 schools all around the country, with something like $23 million worth of funding for projects that have benefited around 275,000 students. So we're really hoping that with the information we give you today, hopefully you might be able to join us in raising funds for your students as well.
Yeah. So one of the big advantages of working with Schools Plus is we can support your school to apply for grants that require a DGR1 or a charitable status. So when you're off hunting for grants, you may see that pop up, and we have the ability to help schools that fall within our eligibility to do that. Now, our eligibility, we work with schools that have an ICSEA value below 1,000. That pulls in a number of different factors, low socioeconomic status, location, that kind of thing. And you can find the ICSEA value of your school on the My School website. We've got a link down there. In saying that, if your school is above 1,000 ICSEA, please don't tune out. This webinar is still very relevant to you. You can use whatever information you get out of this to apply for grants. But if you do fall below that ICSEA value and you would like to work with Schools Plus to apply for a grant, we do invite you to reach out to us. We'll provide contact details at the end of the webinar so you can do that. All right, so now we're moving into understanding grants. So I'm going to hand over to Michael, and she's going to discuss her opinions on these questions, and Thomas will also be involved as well.
Thanks so much. In regards to what a grant is, I guess I just classify it as just sort of any funding application. It gets a little bit more complicated than that when you start looking into who the funders are and exactly what they're looking for. But basically, a grant application is a funding opportunity that you can apply for through multiple avenues and different funders. Multiple different opportunities for grants. So with Dementia Australia, I specifically write government applications. That includes state government, federal government, local health districts, council, everything. In the past, I've written trust and foundations grant applications. They're specifically more in a philanthropy space. There's also opportunities with corporate, different organizations offer grant opportunities, sometimes in-kind support through their skills and services. And I think there's also opportunities through PAFs, which are private auxiliary funds. A lot of times they go through big organizations like Perpetual or Equity Trustees to sort of offer up their funding through that. Basically, grants can be used for anything. I've been able to find grants for everything from events to organizational changes to services programs, IT infrastructure. Pretty much if you need funding for it, you can kind of find it anywhere. And if you can't really find it, you can also negotiate it with a corporate or government, just really depends on the need and sort of how you can connect to their outcomes and their objectives and what they're trying to achieve in the community. And basically how to get started, it's just a lot of research, planning, picking out your priorities, and that's sort of before you want to start looking for grants. It's pretty easy to find funding opportunities, quickly apply before you sort of do your planning and figure out what your real priorities are. But my suggestion is always to have an idea of what's your biggest priority for funding, what's your plan to execute it, and then to research the grant. So that's sort of my thoughts. I'll move it on to Thomas.
Thank you, Michael. Great points, really good. So my point of view is really from philanthropy. So it is those trust and foundations and, as Michael said, private ancillary funds. And what those are people's expression of their giving, what they want to give, how they wanted to use their money while they're living, and often after they've passed away. So you're really tapping into those people's passions beyond what guidelines they put up. So you're really looking for, when it comes to philanthropy applications, philanthropy grants, connecting to that passion of those people. And when they choose to offer you a grant, it really is a vote of confidence in your school, in your program, that they believe in what you're doing and they want to support that. So it's really inspirational to receive grants for your program. And in my opinion, the best way to get started, yes, do your research, get involved, do as much background as you can, and start writing an application and get into it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's very valuable information to have. And speaking of planning, our next slide speaks directly to that. So this is a very quick step plan to get you started. There are a lot of benefits of planning. You can have a look and jot down your ideas and make sure that you know exactly what you want to get funding for. So before you even start Googling grant makers and that kind of thing, it's a good idea to write out a plan like this. It can be back on the back of a napkin or something like that, just so you have your thoughts down. If you do make it a bit more formal, like in a Word doc or something, you can share it with a group of people within your school, because putting together a grant, it can involve a lot of people, which I'll talk about in a moment, but you want to be able to share that with your team. So the very first thing that you want to know is, what is your idea? What do you need funding for? And then that's normally fueled by a problem that is within your school. So I'm going to use a real life example. I recently worked with Narromine High. They're a New South Wales school, and they recently received funding from the Matana Foundation for $10,000. So the problem that they had recently built a school community hub in their school, or they'd converted the old principal cottage to the community hub, and the area around it was very bare and underutilized. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to create an interactive community garden space. So that was how they were going to solve that problem. Then you need to have a think about who's going to benefit from the project. Your funder the grant maker will definitely ask this question. In the case of schools, it could normally be teachers, students, the whole school community, members of the local community even. So with Narromine High and their garden, the teachers were definitely involved, students were involved, they were even engaged in, the designing process, which was a great opportunity for them. And they were also inviting in local people from the community to share their gardening knowledge. So that brought everybody together. The next point to consider is your project dates. So once you know when you want the funding by, it's easy to work back from there. So for example, with a garden again, say you wanted to start construction in the school holidays of term 2, you want to plan back from there. So grant makers, they can have a variety of, lead time with when the funds will be distributed, and it's no good applying for a grant that will be paid out to you next year. You want to find grants that will work to your timeline, or you want to adjust your timeline to that grant if you think that's the one you want to apply for. And then there's also things to consider, when do the contractors need to be paid, and when do you need to have approval by from your principal by, and those kinds of things. So start a bit of a timeline and jot those down. The next point to consider is, what is the cost? There's no point applying for a $10,000 grant when your project is actually $100,000. In my experience, grant makers, they typically like to fund whole projects. If you're applying for a $10,000 grant and your project is $100,000, it probably won't get past the people that, have a whole project for $10,000. So do a budget, and if it is going to be more than the grant, have a think of where you'll get the other funding. For example, other funding sources, your P&C may be able to help you here. The school, Schools Plus has a fundraising platform that I will touch on. It's a crowdfunding platform that you may like to use. Think about what the cost will be.
Can I jump in there as well? Because when it does come to cost, where grant makers will often ask, we know what you're seeking, but what is the total project cost? And they do like to see that, if the total project cost is higher than what you're actually seeking or what they provide, they do like to see where that's coming from. So, if the P&C is putting in $5,000 and the school itself's putting in, 50 or 10,000, whatever it is, you do need to set that information out.
Yeah, exactly. So if you've already achieved $90,000 in fundraising and then you need that $10,000, that could actually work in your favor. They see how committed you are to that project and to that funding, so they know it's got legs and it will go ahead. And then the last point to consider here is your team members. Don't apply for a grant on your own. You'll need to bring in a lot of data from other places. The first and most important part would be getting approval from your principal, so you'll definitely need to talk to them about it. A lot of grants will actually need sign off from the principal. You're welcome to submit the application yourself, but it will need the principal to have their name and contact details on there. And also they may ask for the principal's phone number, so it's good for them to know what the project is if they get that phone call. And there's other people like suppliers, teachers, P&C members, any school support staff, they may have baseline data for you to add to that. For example, for the Narromine High example, they wanted to start an in-school suspension program at the community garden. So they definitely needed the school support staff there to be on board and to provide that information. All right, so once you have your plan together, you can start telling your story. So one of the key questions that we got was how to stand out as a small rural primary school with a grant application. You're competing against other people, how to make your school stand out. And the one key thing here is the ability to tell your story. And Cheryl is going to elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to answer that question, I guess, you know, you'd definitely be trying to search for grant makers who have an interest in rural and regional areas. That they are keen to support, you know, they have an understanding of regional and rural communities, and, you know, that's where they want to invest. So that would be your, you know, one of the first things I would say there. And I guess telling your story is, I think, as Melissa said at the start, connecting to the heart of the people who are reading the application. As Thomas said, you know, quite often you have to do this in, you know, it's tricky to write grants because you have to do this in small numbers of words quite often. So you have to be fast at getting across your message. But, you know, the example that Melissa's just told, you want to tell about how you're trying to create this interactive community garden to bring together your community, to provide opportunities to for community engagement, to bring parents and other community members into the school, which is going to enrich the learning of the students in the school. You're creating an interactive learning environment when students can learn using, you know, really practical activities, gardening activities and composting activities, and, you know, irrigation and that sort of thing. They're learning about that sort of thing in a very interactive and hands-on and practical way, which I know increasingly many schools are trying to provide opportunities to do. You know, and you talk about the kind of skills that the students would be learning in doing this. You know, it's not just about, you know, about learning about gardens, for instance, but, you know, there's probably some teamwork involved and collaboration and problem solving that will go on if they're kind of learning how to design a garden and where the pipes and the irrigation and the hothouse and all of those sorts of things need to be. And so that kind of flows into, you know, what are going to be the outcomes for your students. As Melissa has said, you know, we do need some data as well. So, you know, if it's about addressing perhaps behaviour as this project partly was about, you know, what is the situation now, and what do you hope it will be at the end of the project, or once this is up and going. So just talking about, you know, what your ambitions are for it, and being as you know, as kind of specific as you can about the levels of engagement or attendance or learning that you're expecting from your students as a result of that. I think one of the things that I'm excited about with this project to see how it goes is they're developing a yarning circle, and they're planning on holding community events and cultural activities in this yarning circle and outdoor space at this school. So you know, that's going to be fantastic for community engagement and for student kind of connection there as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you, Cheryl. All right, so hot topic that we're going to discuss here is where can my school find grants? So there are a lot of websites that you can go to. The obvious one that most of you probably are aware of is the Department of Education. They have grants for many things, for example, capital grants. In regards to Schools Plus, if you were to be working with us, we can't support schools with big capital projects like that. We would refer you to the Department of Education for that kind of thing, and be on the lookout for those kinds of grants. But plenty of other options for other things. Keep a lookout on federal, state and local government websites. A big one we've had quite a bit of success with is local council grants and your local MP. It's always great to keep an eye on their social media platforms. A lot of them actually tweet a lot. So if you get on Twitter, they'll tweet about any grant opportunities, and they do see schools as a really good connection into the community, so they do like to fund through those, but there is restrictions with that charitable status or DGR1. So if you do find that barrier, have a chat with us if you're eligible.
Can I say as well that often with your local MPs, we've heard from some schools that they have MPs who don't just make grants themselves, but do provide a bit of a kind of grant search activity as well. So they are often sharing information about other grants that are available in their communities too. So definitely get in touch with them.
Yeah. Then we have trust and foundations. If you're aware of a trust and foundation that you'd like to apply for, if you've heard on the grapevine about them, that maybe they've funded another school or another project in your community, have a look at their website. There's regional organisations, for example, Regional Development Australia. There's also corporate foundations. Do you think, would they have it on their website if they've got a grant round open, or is it more of an invite kind of thing?
Yeah, some do, and it kind of depends on the size of them as well. There are lots of corporates who might be big in your community, or even just temporarily in your community. For instance, infrastructure organisations that are working on building a road or building some new infrastructure in your region. They often provide grants to the community, during the time that infrastructure is being built, for instance. So it's definitely worth taking a look at some of the bigger, if you have bigger businesses in your community, definitely take a look at their websites, or even give them a call and see if they have grants. Because quite often making a phone call is the first way to find out whether there's funding available from an organisation.
Yeah, exactly. And the last one there is not-for-profit organisations such as Schools Plus. So a little plug for us, we do have a grant round that opens up mid-year, and that's available to eligible schools for projects that are strategic and lead to improved student outcomes. So follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to find out more about that. I believe it's about $30,000 in funding for individuals, 65 for clusters. So keep an eye out for that.
Can I say as well, local clubs are another way, your kind of Rotary Club or Lions Club and that sort of thing sometimes provide grants to schools as well. So that would be another opportunity to explore. I'm just thinking.
That's one I forgot, so thank you, Cheryl. And then, that's a lot of places that you could potentially be looking. So there are grant databases that nice and neatly package up these grants for you, and you can perform a search with those. Some of them come... Oh, sorry, if we could just mute all microphones, please, that'd be great. So we've got the Funding Centre, which is, that's a paid platform, but you can have a 14-day free trial. We've got Tender Bridge. That's actually specifically for schools and education bodies, so that's really good. It's a fortnightly alert. They send it out in an email, so that's great to keep an eye on. We also advertise our Schools Plus grant through them. The Grants Hub, that is, I think that's one that Schools Plus uses, and it's been really good. 14-day free trial, if you wanted to have a look at that. And then grantready.com.au, which has a basic free membership. So have a look at that, screenshot this page. If you do want to see these slides afterwards, we will be sending out a survey, and as a little thank you for doing this survey on how this webinar went, you'll receive the PDF of the slides, so you'll have access to them that way. All right, so we'll be moving on into grant writing. So this is the preparation stage. I'll hand over again to Michael, and she will chat a bit more about this.
Thanks so much. So preparation, I find, is key, and it'll depend on sort of what you're applying for. When it comes to a government application, it's really focused on meeting their objectives and their key goals and what they're trying to achieve with the funding. With something like a trust or a foundation, or maybe even a corporate body, it's more focused on building a relationship and them understanding maybe your background and what you're trying to achieve, and being able to work together in more of a partnership. I'd say that Trust and Foundations, even corporate, is very relationship focused, where with government, it's more trying to tick boxes. So in that regards, it just depends on what you're applying for. A lot of times there will be a contact, could be a name, an email, and a phone number. It's great to get in contact, could be with the government or the Trust and Foundations person, and just have a chat with them. It could be to discuss the project you want to apply for, if you have any questions around the application. I find a lot of times you can even ask them for advice. It's not really meant to be a tricky process. A lot of times you can say, you know, what's your advice in applying for the application? And a lot of times they'll just provide you with some suggestions. And it's just a good opportunity to make the connection and just have a chat. And then at least they know who you are, rather than just being another piece of paper on their desk, because they'll get hundreds or, you know, sometimes thousands of applications. Just really depends. Collaboration is also another good thing just to think about. If there is an opportunity for maybe multiple schools to get together, or for you to collaborate with another organization or company in any other way, funders really like to see collaboration in the community. It could be multiple people coming together. It could just be, you know, getting support from Schools Plus. It looks good to see that you're working with the community and that they can support more than one sort of cause, rather than you know, supporting a community. So that's also just something to think about. The dot points there are just little things to just think about. Just get some details about the school's information, contact details, who's going to be the contact for the application. It could be you or somebody else. And just making sure that you're specifically eligible for that grant is really important, because you don't want to waste your time filling out an application when you find out there's something in the guidelines that says, you know, if you know you're in this area or you don't make this much money, that you're not quite eligible. So just something to think about. I'll pass that on to.
Great. I'll say building relationships with Trust and Foundations, with the program managers, as they're called, which are the people that in Trust and Foundations that will review your application and make recommendations to their board of trustees or directors. So the program managers are incredibly important to build relationships with. If you keep contacting them, you have a couple grant rounds, you're unsuccessful, it's completely okay to call them up and say, what are we doing wrong? Is there something that we're not hitting the mark? Are we doing something incorrectly? Are we telling the story wrong? And they'll tell you, honestly, very often, if there is something wrong with what you're attempting, or if it's just your project's very good, it just didn't make it that round. If you build really good relationships, often they will offer to take a look at what you're doing beforehand, which is a great way to have them look before it really counts. It's not as common, but it can happen if you build those really good relationships. So definitely take that 30 minutes beforehand to give that person, that contact, a call and talk to them about the project.
Great. Thank you, both Michael and Thomas. So we have a quick question for you, Thomas. We've got, Thomas, when you mentioned call for feedback on a declined application, does that work for the Department of Education as well?
I'm really sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't write Department of Education applications. Hopefully someone can answer that though.
I can say that from my experience, I don't know specifically about Department of Education, but I know that almost all government, I'd say it's about like 75% of government applications that you apply for will actually provide feedback. I don't know specifically about them, but from my experience, they want to provide the feedback. They specifically give you the opportunity to give them get in contact, whether it be a call or an email. I assume they'd be the same, but I could be wrong. But that's just from my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say,
interestingly, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Thomas. I mean, I would say in our experience at Schools Plus, I mean, certainly some grant makers, when they respond to you to say yes, to say you're unsuccessful, which unfortunately may happen, and definitely does happen from time to time. Sometimes they will say that that they got so many applications that they don't that they're not able to provide any feedback. But I mean, I think all of us are kind of suggesting that where you can get in touch at the beginning, before you've even applied, and try and start that relationship. It will make you stand out when your grant is applied, when they see, oh, look, that's Thomas from Schools Plus, or there's Michael, we spoke to her the other week. It will make you stand out when your application is there, and then don't hesitate to try and get in touch afterwards. I don't think it matters who the grant maker is. It's, you may want to apply again. So it's worth having that relationship.
And we just had one of the participants reach out to us privately, and they've said, our experience is that you only need to ask. So I'm assuming that they've probably applied for a Department of Education grant. So there's no harm in asking. And one more point here on the preparation that I've got here. You can also use online tools to help you write succinctly and clearly. That was one of the questions we had. So use tools such as Grammarly that actually plugs into Outlook and Word that can help with how your emails are phrasing, pick up grammar, spelling errors, that kind of thing. It's a bit of a much better version of spell check, or you could use an online tool called Hemingway Editor, which is you can actually type into that platform, and it helps you to write at a level that can be understood by a majority of people. So it marks it in education level, so it says you're writing at a year 7 level, year 11 year level, year 12 level, that kind of thing. So the lower the level, the better, which helps with understanding. So a tip, I think I've got it on another slide, is avoid that education jargon, but we'll move into that. Cheryl, there was another question on PowerPoint and dot points. Did you want to answer those?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So often grant makers have a specific form that you need to fill in. So, they will have set questions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the commonly asked questions. And if it's a form, some of them will allow you to kind of format it in a nice way, but frankly, other ones don't provide much many formatting options as well. So it really depends on the form that you're using. I do find that dot points are a way to kind of get information across succinctly and break it up, rather than just putting in slabs of text. So where you are able to use dot points or bold it so that you can kind of separate sections, I think that's a good idea to do so, and always kind of writing in a very active voice as well. The PowerPoint presentation, again, that will really depend on the format that the grant maker is asking you to apply in. I haven't found many opportunities where they have asked you to apply in that way, or where you possibly can apply in that way. But if it's kind of free form and you can apply however you like, I definitely think that, adding a photo or even a video, depending on who the recipient is not a bad idea, because I think that really does bring it to life for them, which is really, as we've said a few times, connecting with their heart and their values is really important.
Yeah, for sure. And as Cheryl said, it just depends on what the grant maker wants, but they will tell you what they want. I've applied for a grant before that was purely video. We had to make a 3-minute video. That was all you could do. So they will tell you exactly what they want. All right, so moving into the next part, which is commonly asked questions. So Thomas, I'll hand over to you for that.
Excellent, thank you. Every application is different that you will prepare, but there are questions that just keep popping up, and you'll see them after you do a couple that, oh, I've done this one, I've written this. I'd also suggest, as you're writing grants and you're going through your journey, make sure you're saving every application in every draft that you're working on. The amount of time saved by being able to pull wording from one application and pop it into another because they ask the exact same question has saved us all hours. So make sure everything's saved and filed effectively. It will save you so much time, I promise. Planned activities. I think it's really important to be clear and concise around what your plans are. As Cheryl said, bullet points are really effective here. If you can't actually do bullet points, just do like one-line answers, you know, hit the enter bar and put another one-line answer in. Say who's doing what. So if your program is around a literacy intervention, for example, who is delivering the literacy intervention in the classroom? Are you bringing in another teacher? Who is that teacher going to be? So who is doing what? That's what will be an effective planned activities answer. Expected outcomes. This can get a bit tricky. Expected outcomes, probably one of the most tricky technical questions that you'll get asked, because a lot of people get it mixed up with the concept of outputs. Now, bear with me, I have to get a bit wonky here, but outputs are what is produced by your activities. So that could be the number of students served in a breakfast program, or the number of homework club sessions that you've done, as an example. They're things that you output. They're not outcomes. The outcome is the difference made by the activities and outputs. So increased student well-being due to healthy children having breakfast programs, and increased maths and literacy scores due to homework clubs. What benefit is occurring because of your activities? So just keep an eye out. There's a lot of articles on the internet about outputs versus outcomes. Sorry, my children are trying to get into my office. It's pretty common. Measurements. Basically, how do you prove that the outcomes are? Very common answers are surveys of students, surveys of teachers, test scores of varieties, NAPLAN, different assessment materials used for students. We're looking for things beyond just simple observation and anecdotes. It has to be some sort of hard data that proves what you're trying to achieve. How do you sustain your project beyond the funding? I often find that's a tricky one too. I might throw to Cheryl or Michael to help me answer that one. In my experience, it often comes down to kind of what skills and what lessons have you learned during the program that will provide a lasting outcome in your school. But if someone else wants to jump in with some thoughts on that one, that'd be good.
Yeah, I think in my experience, what the grant maker's hoping is that their funding isn't just, you know, spent in 6 months for a short-term outcome that doesn't have any long-term effect, or that, you know, the school says they have a great need for improving, you know, some sort of numeracy outcomes, for instance. So employ somebody for 3 months, and then that person leaves and the school can't continue to afford that role without getting the job done completely. So they're really looking to see that that the school has some long-term plan to sustain whatever results are achieved by the grant. You know, whether that is that the school's able to fund it in the long term, or that the teachers will have been trained so that they can carry on the work in the long term. They just needed the funding for the training, or, you know, and it depends on what your, you know, I don't know, this question applies to kind of big strategic projects, and perhaps less so to some of the things that I know that schools are very keen to raise funds for, like, of course, air conditioning, or shade cloth over playgrounds, or you know, that sort of thing, which are all completely reasonable things for you to need as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so thank you both for that. The next part we're going to move into is reporting and saying thank you. We have had a question in from the group. So when Thomas, I'll direct this one to you as well. So maybe you consider this when you're answering about reporting and saying thanks. It says the follow-up paperwork seems overwhelming. How do you get that done without damaging your chances for future grants?
I'm assuming follow-up paperwork.
Yeah, I was reading that
reporting?
as the reporting that you need to do at the end. Yeah.
Also, we have a question about the budget outline, which I think we jumped
sorry,
over,
that was my bad.
No. Oh, all good. Michael might have a good thoughts on budget outlines, I imagine.
I guess in referring to budget is just sort of trying to outline everything. I know one major issue around budgets is trying to include admin costs. A lot of times there are overheads that you have to include, and there's a better way to incorporate it rather than just saying admin costs. I don't know if that refers to schools. I'm not sure if you guys have to include an administrative cost to your programs or not, but there's a good way to sort of outline it to just show that you're being transparent, because I think it's a common thought that if you just put admin, that could go to kind of anything. So if you're able to put down things like, you know, it will go to having rental costs and things like that, to just show that you are being transparent. I don't think they're as reluctant to fund something like an admin cost, but they will also sometimes put down in the outline or the guidelines that they don't. So just something to look out for. But in regards to a budget, it's good to just consider everything you need funded. I always think, like, don't short what you think they'll fund. Just absolutely ask for everything you need, everything, including if you need extra time for yourself, if you need someone on board, literally mark down everything that you need within that project or program, and then find out if it still fits within the means of the grant. And if you can cut back, find ways to cut back, but figure it out basically down to like the hour and just everything you need. So just try to include everything you can, I guess. Maybe you have something else to include, Thomas? I'm not sure.
Yeah, with budgets, definitely make sure they balance. So income, make sure income equals expenses. We see that sometimes they don't equal, and that will only bring up questions that will have to be answered. Make sure everything is realistic in what you're asking for, that the budget matches what you want to do. So if what you want to do is a massive program, but you're only asking for $5,000, the organization might think that it's unrealistic and you won't be looked at favorably. The last thing is, if you have one item in a budget that is a big, like 80% or big part of the budget, then you might need to think about how you can split it up into other grant, like other budget lines, or if there's room to explain why that is such a big part of the application.
Great, thank you. Did you have anything to add, Cheryl?
No, I think they've covered everything there. And just making sure, I think as Thomas said, making sure it connects back to the story as well, though, that you're telling about the need and what you're going to do. We've seen some grant applications that are about, you know, let's say a garden kind of program, a kitchen garden or something like that, but then it has something quite random in there about a whole bunch of textbooks, for instance, that are required, or something that doesn't connect. And you know, you just want to make sure that your whole application tells a story that all makes sense right from the start through to the end, and nothing that kind of makes a grant maker or a reviewer look at it and say, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you. So, all right, we're running a bit short on time. So, Thomas, would you like to quickly whip through this slide with reporting and saying thanks, and then we'll be able to move into a Q&A. So if you've got questions, have a think about them now, and then we'll get started on those.
Thank you. I'll be very brief with this. My biggest lesson here is anything from students is gold. People love seeing things from students, videos, photos, handwritten letters, artwork. I mean, I wouldn't just drop off a box of student art, but maybe that is what they want to see. It is really, yeah, it can be really magical when a organization receives that kind of material. Besides that, really, there will be certain requirements that you sign on for when you accept a grant. Make sure you schedule those in, the reporting. Make sure you get on time with the reports and that you're following the requirements. And if you have questions, contact the organization as soon as possible that gave you the grant and explain to them what your questions are, if something's changed in your project, if the project is not being as successful as you want. Talk to the organization as soon as you know that, explain the situation. They will often grant extensions and allow you to report several months later, and they understand the difficulty of delivering projects on the ground very often. So just get in touch. Don't leave it until the reporting date to have those conversations. Have them as early as possible, and you might be able to turn someone into a repeat funder, which is what you want, someone that you can go back to and ask for money every year.
Michael, do you have anything to add there?
Just something to consider, just because I just realized we hadn't actually mentioned it, just around evaluation for the reporting. Sometimes it can seem like a really big deal to think about evaluation, how you're going to measure things, but it can be something as simple as a quick questionnaire before the project starts, and then when it ends, and then you have some clear measured outcomes of how it sort of went about. So it doesn't need to be a big thing. It can be pretty straightforward as like a 5-question yes or no answer, or a scaled 1 to 5. And then potentially by the end of the project, if the numbers go up, or if, you know, no switches to yes, then you can basically have percentages and numbers of the outcomes. So it's an easy way to just get some clear measured outcomes that just are considered evaluation, but aren't as deep as some can go. So just something to think about.
Yeah. Often on websites, when you do apply for grants, they do have some indication of what the reporting requirements are as well. So you can kind of find that out sometimes before you apply and make a decision about whether you think that's okay or whether it's a bit onerous. And I think it goes back to right back to the planning stage. As Michael and Thomas have said, you know, you do have to, you know, for pretty much every grant maker, and you should report back to let them know what the outcomes are. But you need to plan that in from the start, because you do need to have some sort of baseline data, something that is the starting point of your project, so that you can show what the change is that has occurred. And if you haven't planned that at the start, and 6 or 12 months down the track they're saying, tell us what difference it's made, and you can't tell that story, you're a bit on the back foot. So think about that right at the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. And we've had a comment from one of the participants who's messaged us privately, but they've said reporting is made easier if you collect data as you go. It can be quite challenging if you have to revisit this information after the event or project. We should be aware of the information we need. So sounds like this person could definitely be one of the hosts today. They know their stuff. So thank you very much for your comment. So now we're going to move into the Q&A session. We haven't had any questions come through, so if you're still thinking about that, pop your questions in the chat. I do have one to kick us off. So I would like to ask our grant experts, what advice do you wish you had before you applied for your first grant? So Cheryl, I'll kick off with you.
Question without notice, this one. I think that piece of advice probably about just knowing how to report at the end, actually. I mean, for me, being clear about, you know, what our starting point is and where we're going to get to and how I'm going to report on that at the end has become more important the more grant writing I've done. And I think the other piece of advice, Thomas probably has already put out there the other best piece of advice, which was save it all in a Word doc. Many organizations, you know, you can just put it straight into some, you know, web portal, put your answers straight in, but they often require so much editing and, you know, conversation between different parties within, you know, your school or with other people, that I just think it's best to start on a Word doc, get it all right on the Word doc that you could save somewhere, and then put it into the portal once you feel like you've got it all right.
Yeah, for sure. Michael, how about you? What would be your one piece of advice? Or what do you wish you knew?
I think it would have been nice if someone, when I first started, just told me, like, it's not as big of a deal as it seems. It's pretty straightforward to just answering some questions that if you have the answer to what your program is and what it's going to achieve, I don't think the wording needs to be as fussy about it. I think if you are clear and concise about what you want to do and what you want to achieve, I wouldn't be so fussed about how it sounds or the best way to put it down. I think if somebody wants to fund you, they'll fund you.
Yeah.
And if you have a good relationship and if you're clear about what you're trying to do, and if it's obvious that you've done your planning and your research, that it's really likely that they're going to want to fund you. I just don't think the wording is as important. Some people might think differently, but in regards to it, I think just give it a shot. If there's an opportunity, just put your hat in the ring and just, you never know what's going to come about.
Thank you very much. That was great advice. So question from Joanna. How do you work out the budget for projects? Do you just go for an average or actually get proper quotes before applying for grants? For example, a playground basketball court.
It again depends. I think it's probably sensible to get proper quotes, because I think otherwise you run the risk of getting caught out afterwards that you've applied for too much, or, you know, more likely too little, and then there's a shortfall. Some grantors will want to see your quotes. You actually will be asked to supply the quotes as part of the application. So in that case, obviously you do need actual quotes to go with it. But I guess, again, that is part of the preparation stage as well. You know, if you are planning this project for a playground, you know, in my experience, that is what I applied for my kids' school, and the quotes varied quite considerably. And then we had to take into account, because at least here in New South Wales, it had to be managed through the department, and there was an additional cost with that. We had to know all that up front to put in for the kind of a realistic and right amount. Otherwise, we were going to get caught short.
Yeah, and following on from that, we've got another question that says, what happens if a project comes in under budget?
Well, that's when you get in contact with the funder and you let them know that has happened. I guess there are often two options that arise at that situation. You know, if you and the funder have a decent relationship and you're upfront with them about that, you know, and in the case of the sorts of projects that we fund, often we'd be saying to the schools, well, is there something else in addition to the project that, you know, that we can support you with, that's kind of, you know, the next step of it, or something that will amplify the impact even more. So, you know, there's a potential to perhaps use that $5,000-$10,000 that's left over towards something else. Possibly you may have to, you know, return it to them as well. But as Thomas said, that's always something to have a conversation with the funder about. You need to be upfront about that.
Yeah, for sure. And we've just had a comment in the chat that says, if you have a good relationship with granting body alongside a wonderful idea or project, I've found that grantors may assist you with planning your application. This is not a guarantee, but essentially a great endorsement that you may have a worthy project. So It's really good advice. Okay, so thank you all very much for your questions. If we didn't get to your questions, feel free to send them to us at the contact details that we'll display in a few seconds, and we will definitely be able to help you there. So just as a final wrap up and reminder, if you do come across a grant that you would like to apply for and you fall within our eligibility, reach out to us, have a chat, and we will be happy to help you on your grant journey. Next part, if you are interested in complementing your grants with some other form of fundraising, we have a crowdfunding platform. I'll send you more information after this, a little link on how to get there, but Schools Plus has a crowdfunding platform that I look after and would love to help you with that type of fundraising as well. And then finally, we have our contact details on the screen. You can contact Schools Plus, phone, email, or follow us on the socials. And Michael has very generously offered her email address and her LinkedIn. If you'd like to reach out to her on either of those platforms, she'd be happy to help with some questions if you have any. So thank you all very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure today to have a chat with you. We will be sending out a survey, as I mentioned, at the end with the little carrot and thank you at the end of the PDF slides. But within that survey, we'll be asking what kind of topics you'd like to hear about next time. So we would do, so we've got grant writing this time around, but we'd love to know about more topics that you're interested in this fundraising space. So please feel free to let us know. Yeah, and thank you very much to my co-hosts, Cheryl, Michael, and Thomas. Thank you so much for being here. It's I've learned a lot as well, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. So yeah, thank you everybody, and yes, please feel free to reach out if you need any other help. Thanks so much.